Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday. If you are new to this channel, let me briefly catch you up. On Sundays, I like to do videos focusing on one specific masculine deity, and that changes from month to month. This month, because we have the autumnal equinox coming up, I'm focusing on the god Mabon. So, now that we're all on the same page, what aspect of Mabon are we going to be discussing? I thought it would be useful to discuss the idea of having a resilient spirit. Now, Mabon was abducted when he was just 3 days old, and then he was held in the otherworld, and he remained there until he was rescued by King Arthur and his men. During his time of captivity, all the stories say that Mabon grew in strength and wisdom. And apparently after his rescue, he was feeling feisty and energetic enough to immediately join a quest. That was to join Coleridge, who was seeking to win the hand of Olwen. You would think after such a long confinement, it would have been quite natural for Mabon to have felt depressed, traumatized, or at the very least extremely anxious. I mean, when was the last time he dealt with the outside world, let alone had to do something as momentous as going on a quest with King Arthur? But we didn't see that in the myth. What we saw is that he was ready to just sally forth and take on the world and to do what needed to be done. So, what enabled this to happen? I kept getting stuck on the expression, growing in strength and wisdom. In order to do that when you are trapped, in whatever form the trap happens to take, that surely requires resilience. So in order to become resilient, what has to be done is that one has to reject self-sabotaging behaviors and even thoughts. I think it's one thing to process difficult emotions and to take your time in doing so you do get that junk out of your system. But then there's wallowing in your misfortunes, and we do see a lot of wallowing nowadays. So refocusing on what it is possible to do is going to be ultimately more productive than persistently reviewing what happened and can't be altered. I think there is a time to accept that whatever happened, happened, to set that down on an emotional level and move on to what happens next. Resilience certainly requires a great degree of self-control. Our feelings, particularly if they're very strong and they're fixated on just one thing, and if that one thing happens to be very traumatic for us, those feelings can prey on us. They can feed on our very spirit. And that feeding, that hunger, no matter how much you cater to it, it can never be satisfied. It will consume more and more and more of you until you are completely exhausted and drained. And you're not going to get a release from these feelings or from that really detrimental cycle until you do something proactive about it. You can't postpone it indefinitely until you get closure of some kind. Sometimes it isn't always possible to get the sort of thing that people are looking for when they say they want closure. What's required in such moments is an act of pure will, a conscious decision that these emotions that have been just eating you alive no longer get to take top priority in your life through your actions, and they don't have top priority within your own mind. Something else has to take the place of those. So once that decision is made, and you actually mean it, because you can fool the outside world, but you can never really fool yourself. You have to be genuine and sincere about this. The challenge thereafter becomes sticking to that decision, and that's when we really see self-control come into play. But once you're there, and you've cataloged all the doors that have closed because of whatever's going on, then you have to look around and see what doors have opened up, what windows are open, what options do you now have that perhaps were closed off to you before. There are going to be new possibilities. We just have to look around to see what those are. Now, if there are no options that are immediately apparent, then we can brainstorm on how to create options. I mean, never forget, we still have our own capacities. No matter what's taken from us, we still have this, and we can make use of it to better the situation. And as we're going through that process, that's the moment to practice coping skills. Not distractions, coping skills. And when I say coping skills, I'm reminded of the Theodore Roosevelt quote. He had a very good phrase. He said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." So making full use of those resources, even if those resources are just within your own mind, you will infinitely be better off than if you were simply allowing the emotions to take you out, bring you to sea, drag you into the undertow, and then drown you. Always try to keep treading water, always try to rise above, and if you are having to make a swim for it in the sea of emotions, try to move in the general direction of the shore. You'll be better off. So we might wonder why else Mabon was able to self-improve while he was a captive. Where did this sense of resiliency come from? And it has to do with what the source of freedom actually is. And that took me to a scene in Game of Thrones. You might recall, if you watched the series, Jon Stark, he took one of the wildlings. Her name was Ygritte, captive. And during this process, he was marching her through the northern snows. They were having an argument, and while they were arguing, she described herself as a free woman, in comparison with him, who had obligations to an organization called the Night's Watch and all kinds of rules and regulations. Now, Jon Snow rejected her claim. He thought that was ridiculous. He said she was his prisoner. How could she possibly be free? Ygritte's retort was that she might be his prisoner, but she was still a free woman. And I think this is one of the most unappreciated lines in the entire series. What I love about it is that it makes it crystal clear that having a free mind equals a free person, whatever bonds you might have holding you down at the moment. Whatever physical captivity you're having to endure, restrictions that you have to work around or do something about. If your mind is free, ultimately you are free, and you will find a way to have the body follow the mind, one way or another. In fact, the only reason why people ever fight for freedom is because of the deep-rooted belief within their mind that says that, their body, their choices they make in their life, their physical autonomy, however you want to put it, that all of that, all of the external actions we could possibly take should be as free as what goes on in our heads. Now, in Celtic mythology, it does not explicitly explain how Mabon was able to create and then maintain his sense of mental freedom. But it only makes sense that this had to have been part of his journey because he was able to take action and he was able to start living the life the moment Arthur and his men liberated him from his physical prison. If he had been mentally enslaved, then he would have been found in a broken state and might have been, psychologically paralyzed from taking any action at all, no matter how wide open his prison doors were swinging. But that isn't what happened. Therefore, his mind had to have been as free, not only as his body was in that moment, but long before he had physical freedom. So what does this mean for us? I think, as I read this story and I think about what's going on in the world, I think the challenge becomes, how can we achieve a state of mental freedom and become resilient and be able to take action when the opportunity arises? In the coming years, I think it's probable, likely inevitable, that we will experience further restrictions on our freedoms thanks to the machinations of people who indulge in their criminal and treasonous impulses. And I sincerely hope they get everything that's coming to them and that the gods deal with them as they see fit in the other world once that time comes. But before all that happens, in order to survive and in order to be in a condition to where we can be of service and aid in efforts to restore freedom, we have to begin with freedom in our own minds, and that means rejecting the idea and, most importantly, the practice of groupthink. We cannot simply go along with the crowd or get along with others. We have to learn to train our own judgment to make better individual decisions, and we have to see that as our obligation as being a living, breathing human being. It isn't a good enough excuse to do what all the other kids were doing, as if we were some teenager who was offering that as an excuse to their parent for bad behavior. We're adults. It's time to conduct ourselves accordingly, and that means that it doesn't matter if the whole rest of the world says you should be doing and saying and thinking this and such. If we know better, if we know that isn't correct, there's no excuse to continue going on with the crowd. And yes, that is scary, but it is absolutely necessary. And if we're going to have the strength of character to do that, we will have to define and be able to articulate what freedom means and why it has value to human beings. And from that point, we have to be prepared to defend it in any way that we can. So, as we are working ourselves up into this point, we also need to work to overcome whatever past traumas that have been holding us down, anything else that just kind of bogs us down or keeps us from feeling mentally free. And that means each day we have to make a conscious choice to work through what we have to work through and then live as freely as we possibly can. Only then can we truly start to have that resilient spirit that Mabon had. Our freedom begins here. Everything else is a subsequent consequence of what's in here. So, that's what I had to say about that. I hope it was interesting for you. Be sure to join us at the brew. There'll be an invitation link in the description box below so you can add your thoughts to my interpretation of the story and how we might be able to apply it to ourselves today. I'd love to hear from you, so hopefully I will. But until then, see you in another video.